Hi everyone, welcome to the Car Chat podcast. And with us this week we have Bruce Southey. Hello.
Hi Sam, how are you?
Very good, very good. Can you tell the audience a little bit about sort of who you are, what you do?
Yeah, okay. I'm basically the co-founder, the founder and managing director, if you like, of Rocketeer Cars, which puts Jaguar V6 engines into MX5s. In a nutshell,
which sounds like a great idea.
Well, yeah, it sounds like a crazy idea, but actually, when you drill down into it, it makes a lot of sense. I think. Yeah.
So, where did this all sort of begin? Where did your journey towards this begin? Even like, have you been always putting engines in cars, or what?
Effectively, yes. The idea sprung originally when I was working at Overfinch, which you may know does shoehorn big engines into or used to shoehorn big engines into Range Rovers. So the idea of doing an engine transplant wasn't alien to me. I've always loved MX5s, had a few of them. They were launched when I was at university, and it just seemed to be a distillation of everything that a sports car should be in a modern package. So I've always had a soft spot for them. Owned a few, and we all know they lack power. So the idea was to add power, but not just. I didn't want a turbo, didn't want a supercharge. That just seemed to be, squeezing too much out of a little engine, and it's always still going to be a 4-pot. And I wanted something a bit more exotic. So the hunt was on for, okay, if I'm going to change the engine, what's it going to be? Littered around the workshop at Overfinch are V8 engines, left, right, and centre. So that was the obvious first choice, but that's just wrong. It's just, the MX5 is. I know the Americans do it and do it very successfully, and if that's your thing, then great. But it wasn't what I was after. It wasn't what I was trying to achieve. Yeah. And the V8's it's overkill. It's overpowering, figuratively and literally. So no, V8 was just wrong. MX5 or Miata is not a muscle car. It never was. It's a little compact sports car, European sports car. So. And the chap who ran Overfinch, who really knows his stuff, he knew everything about everything car-wise. He said, try the V6 made no sense. Straight 6 is going to be too long. V8's too much, so it had to be a 6. So V6 made sense. The obvious choice was going to be something like an Alfa Romeo, a Busso engine, which is like. But they're quite expensive, they're not particularly light. And anyway, the guy who ran Overfinch at the time, a chap called Douglas Cook, who was very, very knowledgeable of these things, said try the Ford. Originally the 2.5, which he had in a Mondeo or something. He said that's as sweet as any Italian lump. It's a really, really nice engine. So the hunt was on for one of those. And the best of the bunch, they made millions of them in all sorts of shapes and sizes. 2.5 up to, they do a 2.1 as well, actually. 2.5 up to 3 litres, all showing pretty much the same fundamental architecture. It was used in things like Nobles. But the best of the bunch was the Jaguar, because it had a forged crank, it had a better power output. It was always designed to be north-south installation, so it didn't have sort of ancillaries hanging off the back of one of the heads and stuff like that, which some of the transverse designs did. And so originally I bought an S-type Jaguar, literally the whole thing, with the intention of transplanting the whole powertrain. Because, that's going to be easy, just keep the gearbox, keep the diff. But you actually start thinking about it, working it out, it's like, well, if I change the gearbox, I've got to change the diff. If I change the diff, I've got to change the half shafts. And before you know where it is, you've no longer got an MX5, and that kind of defeats the object. So everything that's great about the MX5, the purity of it, the balance of it, that had to remain. It was pointless doing this just for more power. So the idea was to keep everything that's great about the MX5 and throw nothing away. So the decision was sort of fairly, the logical train of thought was actually let's just keep the engine, and everything south of that, i.e. gearbox, transmission, diff, everything, all the suspension, everything stays the same. That beautiful gear shift, that was, one of those attributes that you want to keep. The balance. The other thing about the V6 engine, it's all aluminium. And so it's actually lighter than the 1.8 4-pot that comes out. So you're in with a fighting chance of actually not upsetting the balance. Yeah. So I don't think the engine is pretty light for what it is, but actually it's the boat anchor of a 1.8 that's in there originally. It's not particularly, that's really heavy. So that was to our advantage. And so the first car was built just using it was only ever designed as a one-off, just for myself. This was just a bit of entertainment at the weekends kind of thing, just because it seemed like a good idea.
Surely there's quite a big project.
It turned into a big project. It shouldn't really have been, but as these things, generally materialise. So the sort of the epiphany moment was we actually got the engine running, got it in the car, and actually drove it down the road. And the thing I was hoping for, but didn't dare to expect, was this sort of the character of it. It was literally the first time I drove it down the road. It was the suspension was horribly set up. None of the geometry was done. None of the mapping was done. It was on throttle bodies. It was horrible in so many ways. It was horrible, but it had that. It had something. It had that sort of little essence of soul, and it was that moment of like, do you know what, this is going to work. This is. There was no other way of telling it. It was than just to build it and find out. And it was like, yes, we've got something here. This could be really, really good. Basically, I took it to a few shows and things like that, Goodwood Breakfast Club and shows like that. And then this chap called Alex Kirsten, who I'd never heard of at the time, but a friend of mine said, "Oh, you want to get in touch with him? He's into his MX5s." And he was looking for something to do with his Phil, his little MX5. And he got hold of it. I said, "Oh, yeah, come and drive it. It'd be great, fine." So he drove the prototype. And went mad for it. He was, it was a really good video. He was, the enthusiasm for it really came through. He's a bit of a character, but he is. Basically the essence of it, I think he captured it quite nicely. He understood it, I think. And that just it kind of took off from there. And he said, "I want one." And lots of other people had said, "Yeah, I'd like one." So all right then, okay, if I get 25, this is what I reckon it's going to cost. If I get 25 deposits, did my maths, which isn't brilliant. I'll build it. I'll make 25 of them. There you go. And to my surprise and somewhat, I suppose, disappointment, I got 25 deposits. Oh crap! Okay, now I've got to do this. So okay, fine. I hadn't really thought about it. I really didn't expect that to happen. So the task was then, okay, I've got to make 25 of these. Take it all apart and, okay, if I'm going to make 25 of these, what's the best way of doing it? And can I make some improvements at the same time? And, the designer in me just got a bit carried away. It's like, right, well, you've just got to start again, basically. So we've proved the principle. Basically, that first prototype was literally that. It was a proof of principle. It demonstrated that actually the idea was correct. We demonstrated that, it had that... greater than the sum of its parts. If ever there was a, V6 plus MX5 equals MX is greater than MX V6 is so true. So pretty much everything got redesigned. Every single component was. I think the only thing that remained was I think the front pulley design we kept, but everything else we had a new subframe. We actually borrowed a subframe from the V8 conversions. There's this tubular thing which gives you a lot more space for packaging. Okay. So that was it wasn't particularly stiff or strong. So we designed our own for that, and new headers, new intake system because the throttle bodies were hopeless and didn't actually yield any sort of decent power. They sounded really good, but apart from that, they didn't really work. And we wanted something that was. I say OE. People's expectations of these things are very, very high now because of what big manufacturers do. What you get is incredible, really. The engineering input that goes into a modern car these days is extraordinary, and that's the hygiene. That's the entry level now. That's what people expect. It's very easy to say built not bought, and make excuses for lots and lots of things that things that don't work properly and are less than ideal, but people don't like that. So you've got to get all those things right. Yeah, so we went to plenums instead of throttle bodies to get things like decent idle control, hot and cold start, all that sort of thing, working nicely. And they yielded better power and torque. And it's all batch production, so each batch you learn something new and it gets better and better and better, and we're pretty much nailed now. I think it's, we've got something that's very repeatable, very reliable. We're always learning stuff, we're always improving things. And to date, I think we've done about, it's over 100 kits have been sold now.
Oh, wow.
And there's at least 10 UK factory-built cars. And there's also cars in Europe, America, Australia. There's actually 3 in Jersey. Which is...
Did one person buy one and then his mates drove
They
it
all seem to know each other, yes. Yeah, 2 of them bought them at the same time.
How do you go about designing all of these parts? Like, okay, what's your sort of background-ish on this sort of thing?
Oh, right. Yeah, well, my background is design. So I studied transport design at Coventry University, which is basically an industrial design course, but with a focus on transport and cars. So with the intent, I wanted to be a car designer, the saucy sketches, the slick renderings, and I wanted to be a car, I suppose I am now. So Coventry University was my training ground, as it were. I worked mainly in product design early on, consultancies in London. When I graduated, it was actually pretty difficult to go and find a job in automotive because it was a big recession and the automotive industry was on its knees and all sorts of things. So it was actually pretty tough going to find, go straight into the studios, which was... So I ended up working in design consultancy, and by more luck than judgment, actually, they turned out to be doing a lot of transport stuff. So I did a lot of aircraft interiors early on.
Okay.
So things like... it's one of the first sleeper seats for Singapore Airlines. We worked on the first class sleeper seats for that, and then a number of aircraft projects after that.
What are some of the sort of challenges of designing an aircraft seat or interior?
Well, weight. Number one is weight.
Yeah.
Massive. And then you've got all the crash tests. So you took, crash tests are pretty extensive in cars, but in aircraft it's like 19G crash test. So they put this thing on a sled and slide it down at 19G, and so you've got the challenge of weight and strength and stuff like that. But also, I'm not an engineer by training. I do the engineering side of things as well, but. So that side of things, but you have to, obviously, as a designer, you have to be aware of those requirements, so you don't do design stuff that it has no hope of meeting that criteria. And bureaucracy, that's the amount of all the. So I'll give you an example. One of the we did a sled test on the Rainbow seat. I called it Rainbow. That was the project name. It was an aircraft seat, needed a sled test, did 19G, and then the designers changed the specification of the fabric on the seats, just a different colour or something like that. The chairman's wife didn't like the blue, so we did it red or something. And all the engineers were saying we have to redo the sled test. Why? Because you changed the coefficient of friction on the seats. That's going to change the result of the test. And it's like, really? What if we change the uniform? That's going to change the coefficient of friction. Do we still have to retest then? So stuff like that was extraordinary. You get that in the car industry as well. So having worked on planes, trains, trains and automobiles, I ended up working for an innovation company in Cambridge. So it's sort of technology innovation and stuff like that. And that was a great experience. I was in there about 5 years, but they kind of taught you how to think, some of the methods and the processes. So this building was basically full of 200 scientists and physicists and chemists and, all brains the size of planets with dubious social skills and probably personal hygiene, but brilliant minds, absolutely brilliant. And so working with people like that was fascinating, and trying to herd their ideas into something, and build it up into something that's, solving problems. That was a great experience. I met some really interesting people there.
And what are you tasked with in somewhere like that? Just
inventing
stuff?
Inventing stuff, yeah. And it was, one of the things I think that was really tough about it sometimes was, 1 month you'd be working on something proper, life-changing, so like insulin delivery devices. And when you go, we did a lot of research and, talked to a lot of people who had diabetes, type 1, type 2, and all the different methods they use to manage the condition. It's a nasty, having to live with that was horrible. And so it was quite, what's the word I'm looking for? Inspiring and rewarding, because you were designing something and, that was going to change someone's life. It was going to make their life a lot better. So that stuff, that was fascinating. But then the next month you'd be working on pizza packaging. And I found that really hard to reconcile. All these brilliant people, these fantastic minds, and they're being put to task trying to make a crispier pizza. And a microwave pizza. That was interesting. But you're working for big blue chip companies like, the food companies, and as well as medical and so on and so forth. So, but the focus on that was very much the user. So, we called it empathic design. So really getting your head around exactly what the user. It's all the rage now, but this is like 15 years ago, 20 years ago, when, it was less of a buzzword, but the user-centric design wasn't really a thing. Yeah, that was a fantastic background of designing from a user's point of view. It's all very well having all the engineering and all the resources at your disposal, but if you're not designing it for the user, if you're not actually answering someone's need, it's all for nothing. It's a waste of time. Which goes me back to when we drove the Mazda for the first time, and actually, hang on a minute, this is for all the engineering prowess, for all the the investment and so on and so forth. If it didn't have that, if it hadn't had that, then it would have been a waste of time. Doesn't matter how well it was engineered or designed thereafter. So that was a really good grounding, that work in understanding user needs and stuff like that.
Yeah. Presumably, with the engine, when you put it in the car for the first time, like previously it's in a, what was it, S-Class?
S-Type,
S-Type, sorry. That car is significantly heavier, I imagine, than an MX-5.
Yeah, it's the wrong side of 2. It was probably just about the right side of 2 tons, but it's...
Yeah, so the character, I imagine, of the engine feels significantly different in an MX-5.
Yes.
It's like you put a different engine in, even
it
though
is,
it's the same engine.
It really does. And Dan Prosser, who drove it, he nailed that. He said he couldn't believe this thing was actually in humdrum, Jaguar saloons. And he's right. When you actually look at the provenance of the engine and the design and the engineering of it, it's a sports car engine. There's no question. It's over square, so it revs to the heavens. It's got, it's beautifully balanced. It's fantastically simple inside when you take it apart. It's beautifully designed. It was designed by Porsche. Cosworth finished it off. It's a gem. It's Ford's best kept secret. In fact, actually, can we edit this out? Because the minute people find out, they're 300 quid in a scrapyard at the moment. They're just going to go through the roof, except there's about 3 million of them. But it's an absolute peach of an engine. And for the purists out there, it's also found in Mazdas. And Mazda actually tried that engine in the Mark II chassis as a prototype. The reason they didn't do this, and I have this from Tom Matano himself, was it was too good. Basically, it was going to eat into RX sales, which they didn't want to do. So it was a marketing decision that said, no, we can't do this. Great minds think alike, or whatever. Fools seldom differ.
Yeah.
I didn't know they'd done that when I started the project, but it actually transpires they did actually have the same idea. So
that's very cool.
It is an absolute. It's a peach of an engine. It
should have been.
Yeah, and it's that greater than the sum of its parts. They seem to resonate. That engine, that chassis, it's a fantastic combination. It really works.
And presumably that engine is bigger than the previous engine. Is it a nightmare getting it in?
There's actually, apart from the subframe, there's actually quite a lot of space in there. Yes, it is. It's wider, obviously being a V, but it's actually slightly shorter, being 3 cylinders with a slight offset. But yeah, it goes in there. There's when you actually take the engine out of an S-Type and it's got all the ancillaries all over it. It looks enormous. The air conditioning pump, or the what do they call it? The serpentine belt arrangement around the front. You've got alternator, air conditioning punch, power steering pump, everything. It looks enormous, and this huge, great big induction system. It's like twice the size. But when you strip all that off, it's actually really compact. It's actually quite compact because it's a 60-degree V, not 90. So it's actually quite relatively narrow. Yeah. We had to change the sump and stuff because it sits much further back in the chassis. than it does in a Jaguar. So basically the capacity of the sump hangs over the front subframe in the Jaguar. So you've got all the oil bowl at the front, and we had to literally turn that around because the engine sits further back. The cross member sits in front of the engine rather than at the back of the engine. So all that had to be redesigned to package it. But essentially, there's. I wouldn't say it was a tight fit in that I couldn't reuse things like the headers. Of the Jaguar, I couldn't reuse the sump. It didn't just drop in. The engine itself did, but all the ancillaries needed redesigning to package properly.
And how much nicer or better is it now versus that first, test mule?
Oh, it's you can never, the designer in you never wants to stop tinkering. You're always changing something. Yeah. You're always fixing something. So we'll always find stuff that could be a little bit better. But it's night and day better now. But it's still got that, But we haven't lost the hairs on the back of your neck goosebumps thing. That's still there.
Yeah.
We didn't engineer that
ideal.
out.
And now you're putting it in, so you started off putting it in Mark 1s.
Yeah.
Do you now put it in Mark 2s?
Yes, our current demonstrator is a Mark II. The Mark 1 and the Mark II are effectively the same car. They're ostensibly the same car underneath. It was, it was not a top hat. It was just a facelift for one of a fairly extensive facelift, but fundamentally the chassis and engine bay, everything, all the mechanicals are the same underneath. The Mark III is a different kettle of fish. That's a completely different platform. So there's very little that's the same. It's the same in principle. Yeah. Everything's the same but different. So you can't swap the parts over. So, but it's
different enough that.
Yes, exactly. In fact, to the point where I think the gearbox is actually the same. It's the same gearbox. It's just got a different bell housing, a different splines, different this, different. But it's effectively the same thing. So just make it nice and difficult for us.
Rebranded.
Sure they saw us coming.
Yeah. So, okay, performance-wise, what's the standard car do? What do you get from the engine, and how does that translate?
Do you know what? I've really no idea, and it was never it was never part of the brief. That wasn't what it was about. It wasn't about bragging rights, horsepower, blah 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 blah. But it's how the thing felt. This goes back to that sort of what do we want out of this? What's it got to achieve? And it's the feeling. Do you get out of it and you smile and do you look back over your shoulder? All those tests. Those are the tests we've met. We didn't have horsepower targets or torque targets or 0 to 60 targets. But I can tell you we're at about 280 horsepower now, with sort of tweaks to the map and tweaks to the induction system and tweaks to the exhaust. So we're about 280 stock now. That's stock internal.
And what's a normal? What's a stock non-your engine?
About 130, 140.
Okay, so that's a significant.
You're twice the power, twice the horse, twice the power, twice the torque, no weight penalty.
How does it, driving one versus the other, what's the experience difference of the two?
Okay, how do I articulate that? So the thing to remember, it's still a Mazda to drive. It still feels like a Mazda, i.e. the weight distribution. We don't change things like the brakes. You don't have to because the car's no heavier. So on the road, certainly there's no more demand on the already very good brakes. So the steering feel's still there. The balance is still there. The way it turns in, that sort of, pointy feeling at the front end. It's just, okay, here's a way to summarise it. This is how Tom Matano summarised it. MX5 amplified. Which I think is a beautiful way of actually summarising it. So, yes, it's still an MX5 to drive. It's got all of those attributes. It's got all of those things that even the big sports car companies now still benchmark against. Christian von Koenigsegg, for example, recently said, there's a purity in the MX5 that you just can't find. And, people like McLaren, people like Koenigsegg all benchmark against that kind of thing. So those things are still there. What you've got now, though, is it's kind of it's not Jekyll and Hyde, that's the wrong way of putting it, but it's got this bandwidth, this breadth of character to it. So you can bumble about at 1,500 RPM in fifth or sixth gear, and it's perfectly happy and it's effortless, and you can poodle around town and stuff like that. You don't have to change down if you want to, do a quick overtake or something like that. It's just effortless. But if you do, and again, Dan was the one who nailed this in his assessment of it. if you do drive it in the higher echelons of the rev range, if you do wring its neck, it just comes alive. It's just down to that engine. It's got this real spine-tingling soundtrack. It just keeps delivering. It's got this. The torque peaks at about 2.5 to 3,000 RPM, but it just stays flat. It's just there all the time, and the power just keeps climbing. And you can really feel that. It's almost like a sports bike, the way it revs. It's so linear, and the noise that it it's goosebumps. It's great. It just makes you smile. You can't stop smiling. And that's what it's all about. And the other thing about and I say it's still an MX5, is, for a B-road blast, nothing quite matches that car, purely because of its size. Its diminutive size. Yeah. Even something like, even a Boxster, which isn't a big car, you still have to breathe in something coming the other way down a B-road. This thing just soaks it up, and you don't, it's just a perfect little tool for that sort of thing. Yeah,
and presumably you get... I've not driven many MX5s. I've done a little bit of racing in the Mark 1. I'm keen.
Do, yeah.
Whereabouts are you based?
Well, the workshop's in Hungerford, in Berkshire. I live in Farnham in Surrey. So, but basically, all the demonstrations take place. Basically, I share a space with Bassett Down Balancing. I got in touch with Bassett Down because I needed someone who could build engines. Simultaneously, they got in touch with me because he's an MX5 enthusiast and was interested in putting this engine in his car. And so we got, hang on a minute, aren't you the bloke who found... Yeah. And ever since, we've been working together, basically, and to the point where Andy Bell, the guy who runs the place, said, look, we're building the engines in this room. There's a ramp in this room. Why don't you just come and build them here? So I was, okay, that makes sense. And I've been there ever since.
Nice.
So we are getting a bit pushed for space, but that's basically how it's been working ever since.
No, it sounds
he builds, the engine's already very, very good. But the engines that he rebuilds, they're basically blueprinted. So all the pistons and rods and everything are all matched for size and weight.
Okay. All
dynamically balanced. The things, built to the highest possible tolerance, and it does make a difference. It feels different. We've had brand new engines from Jaguar, which are great, but they're not as nice as the rebuilt one from Bassett Down. They do. They're sweeter. And
then, so presumably as well, with this, the more torque and power, you get an adjustability, a throttle adjustability that you don't have in the standard car.
Yeah. Which can be a bit hairy.
Probably makes it slightly more fun.
It's very analog, very, very analog. But again, benign. I used to have a Lotus Elise, which was a huge amount of fun. I'm probably not much of a helmsman, but I spent more on track days. I spent more time going backwards in that thing. I could never. It was, but the MX5 chassis is so much more predictable. You got so much more. It gives you notice before the tail comes round and asks you how much you'd like it to come round with your right foot, sort of thing. It's so much more rewarding. It makes you feel like a driving god. They're great in that respect. Whereas the Lotus just made me feel completely hopeless. It was a lovely little car and a lot of fun, but maybe I just didn't get the hang of it. And like I said, I'm probably not much of a helmsman. But
I think if you have found a car that seems, you can drive it well, you can obviously drive, to some extent. And then if you flip-flop between a few different cars and some are hard, I think that's something that various companies do well. But the MX5 is great at. Pretty much all Porsches are like that. They make it seem everything's easy. Yeah. And then you just push it harder and it's still easy even though you're pushing harder. Whereas some cars, you push them harder and harder and then they suddenly start to get really tricky and really the
Lotus felt like that.
You've got to be so on it. And that's, whilst sometimes possibly entertaining. I don't know whether feeling like you're not quite in control is actually that entertaining.
Exactly. On a track, it's all right. Even on a track, it's a bit heart in mouth, but on the road, you can't. You just know. Bad idea.
Have you started doing other modifications to the MX5 now?
Yes and no. The reason why is a lot of that is so well catered for by lots of other people in the aftermarket. So there's companies doing excellent coilovers and dampers and stuff like that. There's companies doing excellent chassis bracing and stuff like that. I think it's pretty well covered. There are some things we're looking at that we'd like to do ourselves because we think we could do it slightly better in terms of match with our kit, not necessarily better in terms of what other people are doing. Not really. We're doing a lot more in the way of sort of colour and materials, that sort of stuff. So getting What I really like to do is move more towards the resto mod side of things, which is where we completely ground up rebuild the car, because there's so much you can do when you take it down to that level, when you take it apart to that level. You can address some of the fundamental issues that the car might have. So things like the chassis stiffness is everyone knows that one, it hasn't got a roof, so that doesn't help, but there's all sorts of things you can do to improve that. And also you're talking about a 20, 25-year-old car. It's probably got a little bit baggy in terms of its, chassis stiffness. So we can, seam weld and address issues like that and put little, gussets and things like that in the right places. Yeah, that's something we really want to get into. The problem, and this is no secret. The problem with the MX5 as a resto mod proposition is it's very cheap. If ever there was a case of, you get what you pay for, the MX5 is kind of the exception that proves the rule. It is, by any benchmark, by any standard, it's up there as a driving proposition. It's up there with the greats, even now. And yet you can pick them up for 1,500 quid, £2,000. It's this hang on a minute, this doesn't follow the usual rules. So as a benchmark, as a foundation, as a fundamental, if you were going to design a sports car from scratch, you'd set out all your attributes and all the criteria you'd like to meet. Well, the Mazda MX-5 ticks 90% of them already. So if you use that as a foundation, and that's why we chose the MX-5, not because it's cute or because it's got pop-up headlights or anything like that, or because it's cheap. We chose it because it's a fantastic platform. And as a driving experience, there's nothing comes close. I always get the question as like, oh, crikey, £15,000, that's a lot of money to put into a £2,000 car. Well, yes, I see your point, but you're looking at it wrong. Look at what it actually delivers at the end of it. So you're talking about a £17,000 car or a £20,000 car by the time you've done some springs and dampers and addressed the rust and stuff like that. You can't buy anything that drives like that does. Yes, you could go and buy a Porsche Boxster. Yes, you could go and buy a Cayman, but they're different. I'm not saying they're bad, but they are different. And I've got customers who say, actually, I prefer my MX-V6 to my Porsche Boxster because the Porsche Boxster is almost too good and too big. Yeah. And so how long's a piece of string? How far do you go? And you can go mad. You could go alcoholics mad with it. We could put titanium suspension on it. We could put carbon fibre, this, that, and the other, and it would be, fantastic. But it would cost £300,000, like the Alphaholics does. And I would argue, I'd love to do that because I reckon it would probably still drive better than the Alpha, because the fundamentals are there. I used to work at Ford, and the CEO at the time was a chap called I've got to forget his name now. One of his favourite sayings was he was talking about basketball coaches. One of their favourite sayings was, you can't train 7 feet tall. Hire the talent. And it's true. That it doesn't matter how much money you invest in or how much carbon you throw at it or how much power you throw at it. If the fundamentals aren't there, there's a ceiling to how far you can improve it. The MX-5 is 7 feet tall. It's got the fundamentals. It's got all of those things that they got so right. So as a foundation, as a building block, to do something like a resto mod, I think there's fewer things out there that could compete. But like going back to what I was really saying was that from a branding point of view, people have struggled to get their head around the idea of spending 30, 40, 50,000 pounds on a £2,000 car.
Yes.
I'd say that £100,000 or 50 to £100,000 spent on MX-5 would deliver a much better driving experience than the Alphaholics. There you go. There's a challenge. If someone wants to,
fair play.
If someone wants to commission that build, I'd love to build it.
You know what though? I think give it the same sort of time period. Now, I don't think you want to be waiting this long, but until people start getting, I think people are a bit nostalgic about MX-5s. Yeah. People love their MX-5s, but like they're old, but they're not that old yet.
Yes. Yeah, that's true. That's
so
true.
Give it another 20 years and people will be like, oh yeah, I remember my first sports car. It was an MX5. Now I've got more money. You know what? Let's spend 50 grand,
I fancy
whatever,
one of those.
80 grand.
Because I imagine those Alfa Romeos weren't that particularly desirable at the time. Most of them were, dustpan and brush jobs. If they were ever a barn find, it was a probably 4 tyres left and the rest had dissolved like Alka-Seltzer. So
I don't think they made them in quite the same volume.
That's true. So there's fewer of them. So there's a rarity value to them. But I don't know. I've never driven one, so I don't know what they were like as racing propositions or driving propositions back in their day. I imagine
they're pretty average. They've got to be pretty crappy. Like all cars in that era are a bit average.
It's a 1960s Italian. So
on your website, there is a car that's had the interior done.
That's our Mark 1 demonstrator.
Okay.
So which is
so you do interiors?
Yes. Absolutely. Yeah, we've done that sort of thing for customers. The full interior and all of that stuff.
The interior looks lovely.
It's going back to the 7 feet tall argument. The fundamentals are all there. So the ergonomics are great. It's all reliable in terms of functionality and stuff. There's nothing exotic in there like infotainment systems and traction control. It's all very basic and analog, but that's part of the appeal. Yeah. But in essence, so I worked at I've worked at Ford, I've worked at McLaren, I've worked at Overfinch. So I've taken a few cars apart, and fundamentally, the substrate, if you like, the big piece of plastic that sits across the front of the car that is the dashboard, it's a big injection moulding. They're all effectively the same. What differs them is the material they slap on top. A McLaren, for example, has swathes and swathes of Alcantara, and it's beautiful, and it's But you could do the same to an Mazda MX5 quite easily, and achieve a very similar effect.
No, it looks great. Like it looks really nice. I've got a picture up on the screen.
Oh, I see. Okay, yeah, that makes sense now.
That's why I keep looking off to the side.
That was done while I was actually at Overfinch. I had a trim team there, so I got them to do that interior.
Well, let's sort it out.
Yeah, exactly. And we had they were selling off some Bentley leather, the fire glow leather. So it was like, we can get there. I was going to do the original intention was to do it tan, but this red stuff came up really cheap. So it's actually Bentley fire glow leather in there.
Oh, nice. I think it looks great. It works really well. It's a black car with this red, amazing leather.
It's one of my favourite combination. I'm actually going to paint that car grey. So it's one of my favourite combinations. Is a dark grey with an oxblood.
Oh yeah, that would look good. So what's it cost to do an interior like this?
Oh crikey! Now
this is all sort of.
It varies. It's again, how long is a piece of string? So that car. So all the plastics were colour matched. So the plastics that weren't covered in leather were painted to match the red leather. The top of the dash has been done. All the bolsters, the doors, the underside of the dash is all done. So that would typically, and the seats, and there's also a parcel shelf. So the whole interior of that was done. That would probably cost you done to that level, probably about 6,000 or 7,000.
Okay, this looks great.
And it's a lovely place to be. It really is. And we're building a similar car for a customer at the moment, and that's going to be fantastic. That's going to be lovely. And like I said, it feels like it doesn't feel like a $2,000 car in there. I can assure you.
No.
But that's the point. It's just the only thing that differs something like the MX5 to, I don't know, a Mercedes or a Bentley or something like that is ostensibly the finishes, the materials. It's more than that. I'm being slightly disingenuous of Bentley.
Just a little bit, but
if you get rid of the cheap plastics
from a user,
yes, from a user point of view, from a user perspective, that's of a similar era. Things like panel gaps and the fit and finish of a Bentley these days is just unbelievable. It's pretty.
But they weigh like 4 million tons.
Yes, they are heavy, but I don't think that's and the number of cows inside probably contributes to that somewhat. But
yes.
Yeah,
no, they are amazing. A modern Bentley is a pretty lovely place to sit.
Yeah, my role at McLaren was perceived quality, and so we benchmarked a lot of things like Bentleys and Rolls-Royce and Audi, everything basically. And yeah, Bentleys are just, wow.
Perceived quality at McLaren.
Well, yeah, perceived quality. Yeah, okay, you're going to ask me, what the hell's that? And that was my question.
Because I'm thinking of McLarens and perceived quality and issues I've come across of panels.
Do you want to deal with the real quality first? Yeah, and that was one of the things that was. But perceived quality is about again, it's from that user perspective. So you can quantify quality in terms of panel gaps and surface finish and all that sort of stuff, all in engineering terms. It hasn't got this much roughness, and the panel gap is 0.1 of a millimetre, blah 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 blah. And the customer does see that, but they also see other stuff that you probably don't measure. So things like, well, okay, what's beyond that panel gap? Can you see through the panel gap and what's behind it? So things that you pick up like that can have an impact on how you perceive the quality of a car.
You do get in a car, and actually, just as a human using anything, if I look around my desk, I've got all sorts of random things on here. I've got a random webcam, I picked that up. I've got a pen knife. This is a perfect example of perceived quality. Like, it's an item you pick up and instantly you go like, oh
yeah, is it heavy?
This is like,
is it cold?
It's heavy. It's like, it's like made well, like nice stainless steel. It's got a nice wood hand, all that sort of stuff. And you pick it up and instantly you go like, this is nice.
Yes. That's perceived quality. So a good example is there were some switches that you used in the McLaren, and they were machined CNC. No, hang on. They were injection molded and plated, chrome plated, and they felt fine. One of the proposals was, let's make these out of CNC. Let's CNC machine them because that's a much nicer quality.
Yeah.
But because they were designed to be an injection molding, they didn't translate well as a CNC part, so they actually felt slightly cheaper. The plastic part felt better and looked better. We like CNC machining and we like solid materials and stuff like that.
Yes.
If they're perceived to be that. But if you think it's a piece of plastic, because it looks like a piece of plastic, doesn't matter whether it's CNC machine, cast, or cast out of unobtainium or something. If you imagine it that it's plastic or CNC machining, but it doesn't deliver on that perception, the perception goes away. So I think Jaguars do this particularly badly. Their stuff looks fantastic, but you get up close to it and it's a bit plasticky and not quite, and it's a disappointment. It looks great. So there's a journey, if you like, that the customer takes. And this is all subconscious. You see the thing, you drink it in, you're drinking the proportions, the wheels, the way they sit in the arches, and does it sit right, and the proportions of the glass to the body and all that sort of stuff. And then you start getting closer and you see the details and they all look beautiful. And then if you actually physically touch them and they don't deliver on that thing, the whole thing just shatters. Falls apart. So I think there's a lot to be said for being honest in the first place. Don't set up those perceptions to be so high and then you won't disappoint.
Yeah, because if you have, presumably, like if you CNC'd titanium button or something, or aluminium or whatever, but it's super, super, super thin.
Yeah.
It's not going to feel like it's not going to feel like what it looks like.
Yes.
It looks like it should be a solid bit of metal and go cha-chunk.
Exactly. Do you remember when they started getting really exotic with wood? So, wood veneer was they started sticking it over everything. And they started getting very clever about how they could actually put these veneers over compound surfaces. But up until that point, our perception of wood was it's this sort of flat material, and it looks good and on flat substrates because that's how wood works. Okay, but then we started putting wood on compound surfaces, and everybody thought it was plastic. No, it's real wood. Well, it looks like plastic because wood doesn't do that. And it's the same. If it doesn't deliver on those preconceptions, I'll take a Land Rover for example. In terms of quality, they're dreadful. You could drive a bus through some of the panel gaps. But they're so honest that when you actually go and open the door, it actually feels slightly heavier and clunkier and better than you were led to believe. So the perception goes up. The promise is here, the delivery is here. So whereas things like talk about the Jaguar, the promise is here, but the delivery is down here. It's always going to disappoint. So that's so true. Yeah.
I get to drive all sorts of expensive, amazing stuff, and I've driven a bunch of cheaper things recently. Like I had a Fiesta ST for a bit, and some stuff like that, and cars like that. And actually, I've just got a Peugeot 208, and both of those cars, you open the door and you shut the door, and they make what I would say is like a quality sounding thunk when they shut.
Even the Peugeot, that's interesting.
Even the Peugeot's like it's not like Audi, Bentley level, but it's still reassuringly like solid, and you immediately go like, oh, plus like 20% of like perception of the car. Like I did not expect it to be like this, and it's better.
Yeah, that's absolutely. Ford do that well, I think. I used to work at Ford as well, and that ST is an amazing thing. I was lucky enough. It was the previous model, but I went out to Lommel, which is their proving ground in Belgium, and was taken around the track. It was at they were just about to launch the Focus RS. One of their test drivers took us around their test track in the Focus. I remember when I say a test track, it's not a race track, it's a test track. And this thing is it's set up to deliberately put a car off kilter. Yeah. So it's, adverse camber and blind crests and slippery surfaces, cobbles and stuff like that. It's just, it's a proper nightmare of a circuit. And the way this driver took it around, it was unbelievable. Yeah, it reinforces my idea that I'm not much of a helmsman, because the way these guys drive is just incredible. And the Focus was impressive. Mainly because you kind of expected that. It's the Focus RS, it's this flagship thing. But they also took us around in a Fiesta ST. And that thing was just unbelievable. It was almost more impressive than the Focus. Because, hang on, this is a little hatchback. This shouldn't be doing this. It really shouldn't. The way this thing grabbed it by the scruff of the neck and hurled it around this track, complaining that, it's not really fast enough, and it's not. And we're hanging on for dear life in the back going, oh my God. Just an amazing
like having
little
a chat,
car.
One hand.
Yeah, amazing little car. Fantastic thing.
Yeah, it's the one. Not many modern cars of that ilk move around, like properly move around.
And that's
they move around.
Yeah, but that's so rewarding.
And straight away.
The Mazda's the same. If you can feel it moving around, that's what delivers. It's not about the lap time. It's not about how fast it went from 0 to 60. It's actually how it feels. And so the temptation is to put massive tyres on the MX5 with the V6 in it. And no, don't. Too much grip is definitely a bad thing. Yeah, it's a question of balance. It's always about the balance. It's hitting that balance.
It's always about the balance. And I think a lot of people, and everyone has their own sort of personal journey of what they like in a car. And I think I've been through the more grip, more speed, more everything. And I'm coming out the other side, and I'm realizing that I'm driving these road cars on the road, and the road unfortunately has speed limits and visibility limits and space and whatever. So actually,
and the roads haven't got any bigger. Certainly B roads, but the cars have. The cars are bigger all the time.
Yeah, you drive something modern, and I don't know, like an M5 or something, and your wheels are one edge of the lane to the other edge of the lane, pretty much. And you've got a couple of inches, 5 inches either side.
How much fun is that? Yeah.
To move around, and then you drive something, older and smaller. Like I've got an old 911, and that something like a classic Mini would be the perfect example.
Yeah. Or Minis, going back to your comparison about Alfa Romeos and stuff like that. If you look at there's a nice parallel between Minis and MX5. So when I was a kid, my brothers were messing about with Minis, and they were almost disposable. You just sort of, this one's worn out, I'll go and get another one. It was cheaper to do that than to fix it. Yeah. And there's the same thing going on with MX5s at the moment. There's a sort of the younger generation. It's very much an entry level tuning car, if you like, to mess about with.
Yes.
The same as Minis were back in sort of, I don't know, late 70s, early 80s. And look at Minis now. You go and buy a David Brown Mini, they're sort of entry levels 100k, and they can't make enough of them. So maybe maybe I'm ahead of it. Maybe Rocketeer's ahead of its time, and we just need to wait 20 years to start making some money.
Yeah. My brother-in-law actually put a Subaru engine in a Mini, in an old Mini.
There you go. Yeah.
And it was
it was hilarious. I bet.
It was stupid.
Yeah, but again, that's part of why we still do the kits. as opposed to just doing turnkey cars, is because I think there's the car culture, that built not bought, and kit cars and stuff like that. The idea of actually putting something together yourself and tinkering and messing about with it is so rewarding. And I think there's an older generation now, an older demographic that's enjoying sort of reliving that youth and buying the kits and building the thing themselves. I think there's a growing people have got a bit more time on their hands, but they don't want to build a kit car. The problem with a kit car is it leaks. It's sort of you're not entirely sure how well engineered the chassis is in terms of crash and all that sort of stuff. Whereas this kind of turns it on its head. You've got the well-engineered chassis that will crash well and all that sort of stuff, and you're modifying it, updating it, rather than taking a donor car and putting it into a new chassis.
I would definitely rather do that route.
Yeah, exactly.
And
again, I think there's this perception that people just take things like seals that work absolutely for granted, but they're probably the hardest thing to engineer on a car. Windscreen wipers that don't lift. People just take that for granted, but the amount of effort and engineering input that goes into making that stuff work, really simple hygiene entry-level stuff, which is, a kit car company just simply doesn't have the resources to do that. So flip it on its head and do take all the stuff that's well engineered and make it your own. I think that's probably a more sensible route.
It's definitely more sensible. And I think it's one of those things if you don't have experience of older cars, for example, pre these things working, like I was chatting to someone yesterday, and we were talking about the evolution of cars designed for the UK and cars designed for Germany and how that's sort of affected everything. But he was talking about, let's say like an early Jaguar, I don't know, but say like 90s or something. If you drove it at like 140 miles an hour on the Autobahn, the windscreen wipers would like stop working and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Because they've not been designed to
work. They've certainly not been
speed
tested at that level,
and tested and stuff. Whereas like the idea of windscreen wipers not working to me just ever seemed mad, because I'd only driven like modernish stuff where everything just works. And then I have a backdated 911 SC that was being like messed with, and we took it to Sweden in the winter, which was fun. And you're driving along in like -30 in the snow, and funnily enough, like you can't see a thing, and the windscreen wipers they just don't really work that well.
They're kind of there, but they almost make matters worse. Yeah,
how such a small but very fundamental part can make such a massive difference to your experience.
Yeah,
like
and they've been developing those things, when the windscreen wipers first came out, they were probably a great idea and better than nothing, but they've developed them over 40 years. So, they should bloody well work now. That's,
But no, absolutely. And if you can get those things right without even having to play with it, so you buy a car where all these things work, like you don't have to be adjusting carburetors at different times of year or whatever, all that sort of stuff.
Absolutely, yeah.
The car just fires up, it locks, all that sort of stuff, and then play with it. And like you said, the whole built not bought thing now.
Yeah, there is someone telling me that they were comparing an old user manual with a new one, and the old ones they give you instructions how to do the cam timing or adjust the clearances on the cams. The new one tells you not to drink the battery contents of the battery.
And a number for your dealership.
Exactly, yeah.
That's pretty funny. All right, so I normally wrap these up with 5 questions.
Oh, God, here they come. Right, okay.
Yeah. Do you have a most memorable driving trip or journey?
Most memorable driving trip or journey? For good reasons or bad? Okay. I took my family, my wife and son, we did a trip down to the south of France in a Citroen C1 with a roof box on it. And that was an amazing little car. I love those cars because it goes back to that honesty thing. It's so fit for purpose, that car. It's all the car you'd ever really need. Like I said, my wife uses it for pootling around, and I use it for long trips every now and then. Everything gets chucked to the back. It's 4 doors.
Yeah.
And with a roof box, it took us on holiday to France. And the amount of French that pointed and laughed at, because I don't know why, but it's a French car, effectively.
I have a lot of love for those.
I think they're brilliant.
A 24-hour racing one.
Oh, fantastic. Yeah, so that's what's going to happen to my wife when it finally gives up, when we get her in on wheel. That'll go racing, I think, with my son. Yeah,
wicked.
But yeah, I loved that. That was fun. And the thing about the story was, why it was memorable was because someone lent me a sat-nav. And I don't know what he'd done, but I think he'd put one of the settings to avoid motorways or something.
Ah, okay.
So this trip to France, we were going all over there. I was like, what the hell? Why? It's just taking so long. And the amount of arguments and, outbursts and stuff. It was so it was memorable it's kind of funny now, but at the time it was pretty exasperating. And the other one was Overfinch. We did a trip. I brought one of the cars back from Monaco. We had a show down in Monaco, and I drove one of our Range Rovers back. It's an L322 Range Rover back from Monaco, and I did the whole trip in pretty much a day. It was about 1,250 miles or something, and I just did it non-stop. And my God, it's just a perfect car for that. It was just brilliant. It was, better than a Bentley or something like that. I mean, it was an Overfinch one, so it was dipped in leather and everything like that. It was supercharged and drank fuel like there was no tomorrow. But my God, it was just, after 1,200 miles, I just jumped out of the thing fresh as a daisy. It was fantastic. I've got a big love for Range Rovers. I do love Range Rovers.
Yeah, I would love a mini one, and I don't mean a mini one as in like an Evoque or something. I mean a car that's like a hatchback.
Yep.
That has that Range Rover,
absolutely,
like Bentley-esque comfort, solid, isolate you from the environment.
Exactly.
And it can be more expensitive. Like similar price to maybe a performance version.
I used to think this, and the closest thing I could get to it, I want a small car, I want it to be economical because I'm doing loads of miles.
Yeah.
I want it to be well built and quality and so on and so forth. But I want it to be small and economic. And the only cars that are available are small economic hatchbacks. The only thing that came close was an Audi A2.
Okay.
Because it was well built, it was an Audi, it was solid, it wasn't a brilliant ride and stuff like that, but it felt like a quality car, just small. So I have to, you're right, absolutely right. Why is it that if you want a luxury car, it's got to be massive? I don't want a barge, I just want luxury. Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And I thought the Signet was a fantastic idea, the Aston Martin Signet.
Yes.
Great, why not? That's a brilliant idea. I'll have one of those. But for some reason, maybe it's because it was based on a Toyota or something. It wasn't really an Aston Martin. But I think you're absolutely right. Yeah, why have I got to have such a massive, ostentatious barge just because I want something that's luxurious and, feels great?
And there's no reason why you couldn't do it. And it does seem like all manufacturers are set up that, let's say you take BMW and you go 1, 2, 3, 5, 7, whatever.
Yeah. A, B, C, D, everything's segmented in that way.
And they go like, each level is like another level up of luxury, isolation, quality cars. And they all just go big, bigger, ginormous, whatever. And you're like, no, I want the biggest one in the smallest size.
Yeah.
Just do that.
But it's just the way the mindset works. Another example of that was... I worked at Ford, and one of the things we were working on was things like commercial vehicles in particular. So the F-150, there's exactly the same. You've got the basic model, which is the sort of construction workers version, and the big flagship model, which had everything on it. And the stupid thing was the big flagship model. Again, this is going back to understanding how people actually use the things and what users really, really want. The flagship model with sleeper seats, the buyers of those stay in hotels. They don't sleep in the cab. The construction worker does, but he doesn't want to spend $150,000 on his F-150 just to get the sleeper seats.
Yeah.
So it's nuts. It doesn't. Nobody's really thinking about how these things are actually used. Well, Ford are now. I know that much.
No, it's mad. And you look at it and you go, okay, but there's no option. This is the annoying thing about the car market. Is people say, the customer decides by buying or not buying, but often they're not given the choice.
Exactly.
You're not making the car that they probably would buy.
Yeah.
So and it's fit into your ecosystem.
It's when they design the next Focus, they look at the old one, and they look at the competitors. Yeah. So there's no real. It's like, okay, the whole automotive industry is set up that way. It's a big sausage machine. It's let's do the next Focus, and let's improve those things of the old Focus. There was again, I was working at Ford at the time, and there was this big poster up celebrating, I think it was 50 years of the Focus or something like that. And it started with the Escort, the Mark I Escort, and all these different models running down to, here it is, the latest Focus. And one of the big things of pride was the new Focus was a completely clean sheet of paper. Nothing's going to be carried. It's going to be a completely new, fresh thinking, blah, 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 blah. But in the 50 years between that Escort and that Focus was 50 years, and God knows how many billions of investment for each model, each facelift, as you go down the years. And the cars were the same. They were fundamentally the same. They were, okay, one was a hatchback now. That was probably the most dramatic difference between them. But they were still, they had the, entry level L, popular plus, blah, 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 up to gear or whatever it was. It still had that set of criteria. It was, okay, now it was, I don't know, what do they call it? Titanium and Vignale or something like that. But you still had this hierarchy of trim levels. And is that really how people still buy cars? It just seemed to me that in those 50 years and all those billions of pounds of investment, how little progress had actually been made.
And I don't envy anyone running
Jim Hackett, I just remembered his name, Jim Hackett. He was the chief executive. He's not there anymore. He's not chief executive anymore. But he was the one who came up with the basketball quote, and he was the one. He was. I think they were mad getting rid of him. Again, this is why automotive industry, I think, is doomed. He was a proper visionary. He was advocating this. No. Let's start from the ground up. Let's think about the customers and let's think about the environment. Let's change cities. Let's change this. And this is, by the way, guys, this is going to take 20 years. But no, the shareholders wanted an answer next week and wanted more money.
Yeah, more money tomorrow.
So he was gone. But I think what he was doing was fantastic.
Well, we've slightly deviated.
Sorry, go on. Where's your other questions?
It's okay. 5-car garage.
5-car garage.
Unlimited value.
Range Rover, without a question. If I won the lottery tomorrow, I'd either go out and I'd buy a Range Rover. There's just nothing quite like them. I'd have an MX5 already got one. 2, actually.
Would you go to town on it and do the full...
Yes, I'd do the full resto mod on a Mark
level.
1. Yeah, which is, okay. Mark 1 resto mod, MX5, Range Rover at the other end. Crikey, I get asked this question all the time and I can't think. So those are the 2 bookends, if you like. What would be in the middle?
You've got your comfy daily whatever.
I'm not sure I need anything else, really. I couldn't bring myself to buy a Ferrari because I think the 2 look at me.
You disagree with...
What do I disagree with? Sorry?
I don't know. Do you disagree with the image it has?
Yes, exactly. I think what it says about you is what I struggle with. It could be a fantastic driving machine and so on and so forth, but
Agreed.
What it says about you is couldn't do that. I think the Gordon Murray thing is not because of what it's worth, but because of what it's trying to achieve. I think that's going to be a stunning thing for all the right reasons.
It's going to be wicked.
Yeah, for all the right reasons. And dare I say it, I'm actually trying to do the same sort of thing with the MX5. I'm just starting with a slightly smaller budget. But in essence, it's all about analog. It's all about, I don't care about the weight. I don't care about the power. I don't care about the 0 to 60 time. It's all academic. It's just how it makes you feel, how it feels. That's going to be an awesome thing. Citroen SM.
Ooh.
That was, that was, I was working at Bristol at the time, and the owner of Bristol had a Citroen SM, beautifully restored one. And that was the thing that actually got me into the V6 idea, because that thing sounded just erotic. It was amazing. The Maserati V6 in that sounded glorious. But it was so ahead of its time, that car. It still looks modern now. It still looks jaw-droppingly. You used to go into the workshop and you'd be sitting there down in a suspenser. It's practically on the floor. And the thing just like a spaceship every time. It was just... And it was full of loads of technology and clever ideas and clever thinking. Another interest. I used to know... I was lucky enough to know Alex Moulton, of hydroelastic suspension fame, etc., etc. And one of my favourite things he ever said to me was... French engineering, brilliant, but wrong. Which kind of says that there was the SM was just, it was full of lots of technology. Whether it was right or wrong, it was just clever and inspiring. Yeah. And so Citroen SM. That would be my classic.
And you've got one slot.
One slot.
Would you have a track car, race car, or trying to think other things people go for? Yeah, modern sports car. But if you're going to have a T50,
that ticks all those boxes, doesn't it? And the Range Rover ticks so many boxes.
It does.
I think I might be tempted by here's going to be completely either 2CV or specifically a Citroen Diane, just because I had one when I was a student, and that was just it was just a wonderful thing and just so interesting. Or probably, dare I say it, I know it's a bit of a footballer's thing, but a Bentley Continental Speed. GT Speed. We did a trip to Geneva Motor Show where we were doing some benchmarking for McLaren. I know they were launching it there, and there were two cars on the stand. One was the GT Speed, which was was brilliantly executed. It was, in terms of quality, it was. And I did have one briefly, not mine. I just drove one around for a while, and it was one of those cars that just sort of grew on you. Kind of a keeper. You wouldn't want to sell it because the older it got, the better it got. The leather would get a bit cracked and creaky, but it would still just have oodles of character and charm. So I thought that. But the other car on the stand at Bentley at the time was the blower Bentley. It was sort of £5 million thing, and that was just beautiful. All the cracked leather, the old dials, and the worn brass, and just as a thing to behold, it was, and the Union Jack on the back. It was. Yeah, that was fabulous. So either a Bentley GT Speed or the blower Bentley. That was lovely.
Blower Bentley. I want Bentley to make a modern sports car. Because I'd argue they don't make a sports car. They might argue they make a sports car, but they make GT like cars. A luxury GT. I want them to make a sports car again.
Yes. Okay. What would that be?
Relive some of that. I don't know.
What's the modern interpretation of a blower Bentley? Okay, I'll have one of those. When you've decided what it is, I'll have one of those.
Yeah, something like that. If you could only drive one car for the rest of your life, you're allowed a £500 car on the side.
Well, probably the Range Rover then. Range Rover and a TCV. The Range Rover, I loved the Range Rover, and the whole philosophy of it when we were at Overfinch was just, it's the everyday supercar with the Chevy V8s in it and stuff like that. It was, high performance, all the performance you'd ever need, certainly. But all the practicality, and one of the customers was he used to say, well, I take my kids for a walk up on the common or something. If I turn up in a Rolls Royce and take their scooters and bikes and stuff out of the back, I just look like a complete idiot. If I turn up in a Range Rover, be it an Overfinch or whatever, nobody looks twice. It kind of fits.
No.
And that's the beauty of a Range Rover. It just fits any kind of occasion.
Yeah, you could drive the Queen around in it.
Yeah,
or
drive up
go plugging through a field, or
go
whatever.
Go to the tip.
You
get away with it.
And everyone just goes, "Oh, it's fine."
Yeah.
I went to the tip the other day. I have a 997 GT3 RS.
Oh right.
And it just so happened to be the only car that was like.
What did you put it all on?
I needed to get rid of an old car battery.
Oh, okay.
And so I just took it to the tip and opened the front, took the battery out, and everyone's just looking at you like, what are you doing? Like, why are you here? Like,
Don't you have a man to do that sort of thing? Yeah.
Okay, what do you think is the most undervalued car at the moment? What do you think should be more expensive? Is relatively cheap?
I'm allowed to say an XV6.
You can say that. That would be the classic answer.
I think it's fantastic value. In all honesty, I don't think you can buy anything else that delivers in the same way. If it had a Porsche badge on it, it would be 3 times the price and people wouldn't blink. But because it's an MX5, I think there's a ceiling to what you could charge for it at the moment. I hope that will change, and I think as people grow to understand it better, hopefully with things like this and some marketing effort. Certainly the customers who've got them now get them, understand them, and think it's fantastic value for money. But what else?
Alex loves his.
And it is. It's again, the beauty of the MX5 is you could twist it so many different ways. If I was to build one, it wouldn't be like Alex's. It would be like my Mark 1, which is much more sort of, little GT car. But you can. Andy at Bassett Downs just built a track car that's 900 kilos and 280 horsepower, and it's an absolute weapon. It's unbelievable.
Nice. I bet that's amazing.
It is. It's extraordinary. It's still got some sorting out to do on things like he's put funny brakes in it, and he's got the ratios wrong of the master cylinder to calipers. But once that's sorted out and you can get it to stop properly, we're just trying to think of where we can campaign it, because it's a proper race car, and it's unbelievable.
Yeah.
Anyway,
sounds wicked.
Diverse. What I think is an undervalued car. What, in terms of new cars or old stuff?
Anything. So, like, looking at the market right now, you go like, those should be worth more.
Yeah, that's worth buying one of those now, and because that will only go one way in value. But I think an MX5 Mark 1 is a good investment. They're definitely, only because I've got my finger on that particular pulse, they're definitely going up in value very quickly.
And they can't go. They've definitely hit the can't go much.
They can't go any lower.
Go much lower.
Yeah, they're only going to go one way.
What does a nice-ish Mark 1 cost now?
Probably about five or six. They are, some of the pristine models people are asking 20 for. Whether they actually get that or not, I don't know. Wow. But we could restore you a car for that kind of money. So, but I suppose it's not original.
Yeah.
There's all that sort of provenance argument to go with it.
Yeah,
exactly. But if you're putting a V6, provenance has gone out the window anyway. So,
and I guess those people they're trying to tap into that. I wanted an MX5.
I think there's a lot of that.
When I was
I think there's certainly a demographic that is I'm going to have the cars that I hankered after as a youth but could never afford, but now I've got a bit more disposable income,
and try and get them with as low a mileage as possible, so that they're effectively driving a new car, even though you kind of have to rebuild it to drive it.
So I'm looking around all the time for half decent ones at the right price, which will be completely restored, and the prices are definitely going up without question.
Right, final question.
Go on.
What's the most interesting car to you at the moment?
Interesting car.
Googling. What are you looking up?
Well, the Gordon Murray thing, certainly. I know that's probably a bit of a cliche answer, but it is. It's fascinating, and the focus on that. It's all the things I wish...
How is it not?
Yeah, exactly. It's all the things I wish McLaren had been.
Yes.
Some of the stuff there, but it's to my mind, it's what they should have been doing, but weren't.
You look at that car and go, I just don't understand, and there's got to be some reasons why, but other manufacturers haven't made something like that. Or for me, I don't understand why a manufacturer doesn't make something that's like half of that car. So, I don't know, 500-600 horsepower, 1,100 kilos, so manual.
There's always exactly that. There's always a compromise. There's three things you want. It's got to be fast, and by fast I mean quick to market, not you can't spend forever developing it. It's got to be cheap or affordable or at the right price point for the right demographic, that sort of thing. So fast, cheap, and good, so quality. So you pick two. You're always going to compromise on one or the other. So the Gordon Murray one, you say, that's a no-compromise car. It's not. They've compromised the cost. That thing's going to be horrendously expensive. But it's going to be absolutely brilliant on every other level. So I think it's a question of where you put the compromises. So again, I don't want to ride on Gordon Murray's coattails, but I will. That's kind of what I'm doing. That's kind of what Rocketeer's doing. We're trying to build something that's a bit special, and we're making the right compromises for the right reasons. So we're using a car that's already fundamentally brilliant, and just trying to infill the gaps in what it delivers by other means. And I think that's, is cost effective. But again, it goes back to having the vision right. And I think what's gone wrong at McLaren is the vision's gone a little bit. It's a car company now. It's not this, and Gordon Murray himself says this, you can't build what he's building with a hierarchy, with layers and layers of management, because it's just... No. So the people running McLaren now are all, brilliant, but ex-large corporate sausage machine car manufacturers. And the decisions that those engineers make are very different to the decisions that people like Gordon Murray will make, because his focus is absolutely the user, whereas the corporate structure is going to make decisions in favour of the shareholders, for one of a, and that probably is more important than anything else. It's, what's our bottom line? But Gordon Murray's trying to create a vision, and if it makes some money, he'll be happy. McLaren F1 was notoriously only ever broke even, if that. But look at the thing, the legacy of it. So there's a balance to be made. I mean, there's lots of people out there who want to build fantastic sports cars and will lose their shirt because they'll do it wrong. They'll make compromises for the wrong reasons in the wrong areas. So I've no doubt that Gordon Murray is making the right compromises in terms of cost. But they will be there. They're just less of a criteria than they are at someone like McLaren.
Yeah, and they sold out the T50 apparently very, very, very quickly.
Yeah.
And they sold all, whatever number of it is, 300 cars or something. I'm not sure how many it is.
Yeah.
Very, very quickly. And we look at other manufacturers, and yes, they're sort of doing the right thing for them based on their decisions or whatever. But we're seeing all these special editions, which are not really selling out anymore.
No,
and they're not
exactly.
selling that many.
Yeah.
They're probably still making loads of money. They're just diluting the brands, I think. You look at these cars and you goes, okay, how many cars for nearly £1 million can you buy these days? And the answer is a lot. And how many are people buying? A lot less than people are making.
And the fundamental truth is that, there's people like you and me who have the same aspirations, have the same passions as all those people. The only thing that differs us is our means. I haven't got £2 million to spend on a car. If I did have that kind of money, I probably would. But it doesn't mean that itch is still there to scratch. I still need something in my life that fulfills those emotional needs, if you like. And there are plenty of niches that people fill for those things. And things like Alphaholics is one of them.
And it's finding the product at the price for a certain group of people, because by all accounts, someone like Lotus has been making drivers' cars, but for some reason people haven't been buying tons and tons of them. And it's not because they're not great to drive, because they are great to drive. It's all the other stuff that comes around with a brand and an image and whatever that's making someone go, I'm going to buy a Porsche 911. And trying to make a car for 30,000 people, that 30,000 people are going to spend, say $100,000 on or something.
Yeah.
No thanks. I don't want to do that. I can see why all of these small things have popped up, like yourselves, where you could say, if I sold 300, I would be doing amazingly. Or, your Alphaholics, they sell 10 a year or whatever it is, or something like that. They've only got to find those 10 people.
Yes.
You've got to find your small, crazy, enthusiastic audience that have got the budget for your project and just reach them.
Yeah.
And then screw everyone else.
If you're, it's a pyramid. It's a big triangle. So the people with £10,000 to £20,000 to spend on a car, there's a lot of those. You get up towards, people who've got £1 million to spend on a car. The air's getting pretty thin up there. There's very few people of them at all.
And there's
total.
lots of
and
cars
of
available.
those who will spend the money on a car and not a racehorse or a piece of art. As a percentage of the total, population, actually petrol heads probably aren't that big.
No, depressingly so.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think, we'll find some bars.
We'll get there. We'll get
there. Yeah.
Well, the car sounds fun. I'm
and drive it.
Come and have a go.
I invite anyone who's seriously wants to, doesn't believe me, come and drive it. And I warn you though.
And even if you do,
well, yeah, absolutely. If you do, then proof of the pudding and all that.
It sounds great. It sounds exactly like something I want. Well, thanks very much for coming on the podcast.
It's been a pleasure.